do we go when we die? A question that's puzzled people for centuries. Assuming life after death and reincarnation are real, what occurs in the interim? Where do we go? What will we be doing there? Mission Evolution Radio Show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone TV channel, xztv.ca. Joining us now to explore near-death experiences and past lives is Andy Tomlinson, a known expert in past lives and the soul experiences between lives. He began his career in 1996, originally as a psychologist and psychotherapist, and then moving on to therapy with past lives. He was the founder of the Past Life Regression Academy that's trained over 500 therapists worldwide. Andy is also known for his books, Healing the Eternal Soul, Exploring the Eternal Soul, and Transforming the Eternal Soul. He's also the author of the new book, Between Lives Past Life Regression, Near-Death Experiences, and the Evolution of Consciousness. His website, pioneeringnewconsciousness.com. Andy, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. So you're over there across the pond in the UK, yes?
That's right. Yeah. But I do a lot of work around the world. So I might be physically located in the UK, but my interests are pretty international.
All right. So, Andy, you began your career as a psychologist and a psychotherapist. How did you become interested in past lives?
Well, it was rather thrust on me because in the 4 years of training as a psychotherapist, I'd asked about what happens if a client wants to go into a past life. And remember, this is going back 25 years ago, past lives was still very much in its infancy in terms of the Western world. And I was told, just treat it like a metaphor. So that was the level of training that I had. And sure enough, a little while after I started my practice, a lady came to me and said, I've got a fascination about Venice. I would just wonder if I've had a past life there. Could you give me a past life regression, please? So I stumbled along, but I mean, I was very precise in asking very open questions, such as, what happens next and tell me more. But as the story unfolded, it turned out that she was in Venice, but her job was as a minder of prostitutes, which was the lowest of the low. And this was a rather elderly, prim lady. And then when she came out, she was quite upset at the thought she'd had the past life of being associated with prostitutes. But of course, this was all based in Venice, which is where her fascination with Venice came from, which does really illustrate two things. Sometimes people can get fascinated with a particular culture or a particular part of the world, and it could very well be aspects of a past life is coming through. And the second is that in this case, the past life was a complete surprise for the lady, the complete opposite of what she would expect. Yet it just emerged from her with me just asking very open questions.
How can you tell, Andy, that the person isn't just fanciful and off in their imagination? What tests or studies do we have that prove that there is such a thing as past lives?
Well, I think, first of all, it's looking at some of the qualities of past lives. I mean, we've touched on a couple already. Some of the other qualities is that when people go into past lives, and particularly a lot of deaths in past lives were quite brutal or had emotions associated with it. And people often, when they're going through the past life, they'll recall to some level or other the physical sensations or the emotions. Someone who, for example, has been hung may still be carrying a reluctance to put a bracelet around their neck, and it's this old wound of being hanging that's still bleeding through. Or it could be emotions. Someone who perhaps feels powerless in the current life may have had a past life where they died as a slave. They're totally without power. So this aspect, these are two other aspects. And the third one is that unlike imagination, where if someone's making up a story, for example, for a child, and then half an hour later probably forgotten what the story was, with past lives, they never forget it. And in fact, other bits of the past life tends to bleed through and add more detail to it. So these are some of the qualities that people have for them to decide that past lives are real. But of course, to a skeptic, this isn't necessarily any more evidence than someone who's, for example, has had a romantic encounter and felt love. You know, they know it's real, but then how would you convince a skeptic who'd never experienced love that this is what love's like? And in fact, the best way for any skeptic is to have their own experience, be open-minded, and then make their own conclusion at the end.
Are there any formal studies on past life and past life regression?
Well, there's been a lot of research work with children's past lives, with the work of Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia, and that's been taken over by Jim Tucker, where they've had thousands of children's past lives that have been quite meticulously studied. It seems like children still seem to be able to tune in like a bleed through from the past life a lot easier than when they start to become a little older and become adults. And they went through and investigated the reports that children had had and verified the details. So there's a lot of information through that research, not only in America, but in other countries around the world. And of course, hundreds of thousands of people have had past lives, and it's for them to decide whether it's real or not. And for most of them, there's no question about it being real. In fact, not only is it real, but it can actually be very transformational in helping people work through current life issues. And as a therapist, this is one of my big interests in past lives.
So how can we tell, we're finding now with the study of genetics and epigenetics that trauma can be passed down the genetic line. How can we tell if it's past life or genetic memory?
Well, simply from a point of view that if someone's got a pain in the chest and they go into a past life and at the death point, a sword had been pushed inside them. And then as part of the transformation of the past life, the client imagines, or even through body movement, pulls the sword out, and then the pain just completely goes away. So the link between resolving past lives and resolving current life issues is a very strong indicator that some of the factors that are affecting people are from past lives. Well, of course, equally, it could be from the current life issues, where people's could be, for example, a lot of childhood issues still ripple through into later adult. So the therapist has to separate out where the issues come from and then deal with it.
So, again, with the example of the sword, that still could have been a genetic memory because it's carried by the body. So the memory could be held in the body. So it's still kind of inconclusive, isn't it, whether we're dealing with genetic memory or past life?
Well, I think you would, in order to prove it's a genetic memory, you would have to tune into the memory where it's coming from, because otherwise, how do you know what it is that actually happened? Or, you would have to go through the history of what happened. And that's quite a hard thing to go through and do. But, I mean, it is possible. But again, if people have the experience and for them it's real and it transforms their lives in a meaningful way, that's the most important thing. And
so the proof is in the pudding, right?
Yeah, but I do quite a lot of ancestral work in therapy anyway. So, I mean, for example, if someone has been very badly bullied, for example, it could quite well be that their father or mother, who was the bully, was very badly bullied themselves. And that kind of goes down the generations.
But isn't that Isn't that more like the nature nurture thing where the adult passes on the damage versus it just being coming through the genealogy?
Um, well, I mean, with this sort of example, by going back to the original source of it and working the issue, the client's problem goes away completely. So, I think one of the factors is if you go into a past life and you can't resolve an issue, then it could quite well be coming back through the genes. But one of the things I found with genes is it's more susceptibility that people have. So for example, people may have a weakness in some part of the body that's come from a genetic disposition, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get a particular disease or an illness. There's lots of other factors that could affect it.
All right, that's where epigenetics steps in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, what exactly is therapy with past lives?
Well, therapy with past lives is finding the source of the issue. I mean, sometimes issues can be in the current life, but I'll give you an example of someone who had an issue that had its roots in a past life and how they will still need to do some current life work in order to completely heal the issue. And this was a lady who had been in a powerless position. She'd been abused by her parents. And then she got into a relationship and her husband psychologically abused her. And when people are in this powerless state, it's like the battered housewife or the battered person syndrome. It's very difficult for people to shift out of it. It's like a learned helplessness. Anyway, in this particular case, I went to the source of the issue, and the intent of a therapist is to find out what caused it. And if you go to the very source of it, it's often a lot easier to transform the repeating patterns. And in her case, she was in Victorian England. She'd been born in an orphanage and then somehow had been looked after by a wealthy gent who abused her. And there was nothing she could do because being an orphan, she didn't know anyone, didn't have any money. And he just beat her till eventually she died full of aches and pains over her body with this feeling of powerlessness. And these were the symptoms that she had in her current life, powerlessness, and with it, all of these physical symptoms in the body that she carried over from the past life. So I did work in the current life where she was able to work through the issues with her parents and her current partner to the point where she was able to go to her current partner and say, either treat me well or leave. And she transformed that life and she'd worked through the issue of powerlessness. But it did
Well,
involve following the
Andy,
pattern. Yeah.
It's time for us to take a station break.
Okay.
And Andy and I will return shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
The end has come, the night has fallen. I have reached the end of days. What's real is not, reason fails me. I've gone beyond all known pathways.
If there is reincarnation, what do we do between lives? With us this hour discussing the possibility of past lives is Andy Tomlinson, the author of Between Lives, Past Life Regression, Near-Death Experiences, and the Evolution of Consciousness. Andy, so what are soul experiences between lives?
Well, perhaps if I just explain how I got into this whole area, because I was working with past lives from a therapeutic perspective for quite a number of years. And then a colleague gave me a book called Journey of Souls, written by one of the pioneers in this particular area of soul memories, called Michael Newton. And I put it on one side and didn't think anything of it. And then one day I just had this urge to pick up the book, started reading it. I thought, oh, wow, this sounds really interesting. So I typed things into the search engine to see if there was any training for this. And it turned out that Michael was doing the very last training event of himself in person in Los Angeles in a week's time. And there was one place left. So I wrote off and said, that place is for me. And then I had to explain to my partner at the time why all of a sudden I wanted to fly halfway around the world to go onto a course that I'd never talked about before. So I had to promise a bit of a holiday afterwards. And then I ended up being trained by Michael with the techniques he used for navigating these soul memories between lives. And how it works is that when people are taken to a very deep level of trance and they go to their last past life.
Yeah, let me interrupt just a second. What do you mean they go into a trance? Are we talking shamanism, or are we talking?
Well, as hypnotherapists are trained to take people into hypnotic trance. Oh,
hypnotic. Okay.
Yeah. And at a very deep level of hypnotic trance, then clients will, their conscious mind interference is very, it doesn't exist. So they respond to questions very literally. And then
does the therapist have to be very mindful of the quality of the questions, like nothing leading?
Of course. I mean, just as in navigating past lives, it's so important to ask very clean questions. And by clean questions, it would be something like, what happens next? Describe it in more detail. Or if they're meeting other people, to say, well, is there anything communicated to you? So with very simple questions like this, you can navigate the whole way through rather than introducing any sort of leading, such as, oh, this is your spirit guide, isn't it? You know, I mean, that would be very leading.
Right.
And people who are professionally trained do things, you know, ask questions in this sort of very clean way. And then navigating through the past life death, then it explores what it is that happens all the way through to the birth in the current life. And these
so
are
you have to direct the client at least enough to make sure that they're going through a death and into the next life, don't you?
Well, it would be from, normally it is from the last past life. So the end of that would be the reincarnation in the client's current life.
Okay. And so what I'm saying is you have to direct the client a certain amount to get into the past life that you're going to go to the death of, right?
Oh, yeah. It would be right at the beginning of make the intent to go to the last past life. And then other than that, you just flow with the information that comes up.
Okay.
And, you know, a key part is just going through the death itself. I mean, just to experience what it's like to go through a death sequence is extremely profound, because unless people have had a near-death experience, no one knows what it's really like to die. I mean, when we do eventually pass away, obviously we have the opportunity to experience it then. And so people can just know what it's like when they let go of all the physical hurt or pain. If they've got some illness or disease or some sort of injury of some sort, they leave all the physical sensations with the physical body, and the consciousness comes out of the body and is able to look down and see the body below, very similar to near-death experiences. And and sometimes they may try to communicate to loved ones who may be around the bedside, trying to pass messages But at that point, they probably haven't been able to know how to do that. But they may hang around deliberately. I mean, it could quite well be that the death is a baby and it just wants to stay with its mother. Or it could be the death of a husband or wife and the spouse wants to stay to try to console the partner. But at some point, there'll be a letting go and then moving on. And then the story seems to move to a point of what's referred to as energy healing, where the emotions that are still being carried are stripped off, the memories are retained, but it just increases the vibration of the soul so that it's in its normal soul vibration. And this is a very, very important part.
So basically, during the death process, a person has to, I guess, what you would call drop your robes, let go of the earthly stuff to reach a frequency that they can cross over. Is that what's going on there?
Yeah. I mean, otherwise, if they don't let go of those emotions, they're going to have a lower vibration. And this is a sort of vibration that disconnects spirits, who maybe ghosts or spirit attachments have, because they've never let go of the emotions. They've stayed earthbound instead of moving off into the spiritual dimension.
So once they move into the spiritual dimension, how do they know they're there and what do they find?
Well, they're normally met by other beings. It can be spirit guides. These are spirits that have overseen the whole life and try to help the soul achieve its life purpose. It could be other members from that previous life who died earlier, and they come to just because it can be quite a confusing time for the souls at this point, and they try to come over to add some level of familiarity to it. And they can show themselves almost in physical form, although they are just pure energy. It's quite simple because energy follows thought. So if these spiritual beings choose to show themselves in physical form, that they can do. And this is often quite helpful for the incoming soul to orientate themselves before they start to become familiar with being in their soul energy again.
Okay, so I take it that when you reach this state, you're no longer in your body, ergo you no longer have access to your brain per se. So where are these memories and these images coming from and being formed?
Well, it's coming down to this whole thing about consciousness and where does it reside. I mean, there is a position taken by many people that have got, from a perhaps more materialistic perspective, or particularly a traditional Western world tradition, where consciousness is in the brain. It's the brain activity or the chemical activity in the brain cells. And when someone dies, that finishes. Of course, it doesn't explain how consciousness can leave the physical body after death, because from that particular perspective, it can't possibly happen. And in fact, the difficulty a lot of people have is to explain away near-death experiences. And there were millions of people who had near-death experiences where they've gone through a similar sort of sequence that I've talked about here with the Between Life memories, but at some point they're told you need to go back to the body. And they come back and they talk about their experiences. And in some cases, some of the people who've had near-death experiences have been blind, yet they can still recall seeing their physical body below, the work of other people trying to revive the body. So there's a lot of evidence through near-death experiences that suggesting consciousness is not just in the brain, it's outside the brain. But if you really come to the most fundamental point about this whole argument about where does consciousness reside, you've got to move all the way back to the very beginning, where physicists seem to acknowledge that our whole cosmos or galaxies all started with a Big Bang. So at some point there was matter, that matter broke up into planets, and eventually on our planet life form started, it evolved, and at some point humans came, and then consciousness was created when humans were sufficiently advanced. So in other words, matter existed before consciousness, but it's an assumption. They can't prove it. Now, what happens if consciousness actually existed before matter, and then consciousness created the Big Bang, and consciousness has been part of all parts of the matter all of the way through? And that seems to make a lot more sense with consciousness being not just in humans, but there's a lot of evidence that trees and animals have got a form of consciousness. And in fact, the planet itself has got a consciousness. In fact,
So if we agree, for the sake of argument, that consciousness exists outside of the body, and that once we die, the consciousness goes elsewhere, where's it going?
Well, then, this is the journey that I started to talk about. And an important part is what's called the Past Life Review. And this is where the soul reviews the good things or the bad things that happened during the life, to work out whether they'd actually achieved what they set out to do from a soul perspective. And all lives have got something that souls are trying to learn. It could be mastering some sort of emotional situation, some situations where there's an absence of love, or particularly difficult situations, and they review it to see how well that they did. And this forms a basis of deciding whether the soul wants to have another life
Or
to
not.
try
Well,
to or work through it, or to let go of it and move on to a different.
We're going to have to take a commercial break. Andy and I will be right back to continue our discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Searching through the night, one people, one nation. Searching for the light. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind.
Do we always evolve from life to life, or can we devolve as well? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing consciousness is Andy Tomlinson. His website, pioneeringnewconsciousness.com. Andy, this again, once you leave your body, once you're no longer in this ordinary reality that we all agree upon, are we outside of time and space? And if so, rather than a linear progression, can we evolve or devolve as well from life to life?
I wouldn't like to use the word evolve or devolve, because that's making a subjective judgment, and that's never what seems to happen between lives. It's almost a case of what sort of experience does a soul want. So it's not that any experience is particularly good or any experience is bad. It's almost like the souls are, the earth is like a classroom, and there's each classroom has got a different subject, and souls choose to learn something in a particular situation, and once they've mastered it, they then go on to a different classroom and to work with a different thing. So
how'd you come up with this particular model? What evidence do you have?
Well, I'll just give you a case study example. It's a lady from Canada who contacted me and wanted to have a Between Life Regression. Her husband had died 6 months earlier, and she was having a lot of trouble coping with life. And she had to come over to the UK for something else, and I did a session for her. And she went into a past life of being a lady where her husband had gone off to war and had never come back. And it was just too much for her. She had given up on life, and 3 to 6 months later had passed away. And giving up on life is a little bit like suicide. And when she passed through and was met by a spirit guide, they sat down and reviewed the past life. And the spirit guide was reviewing the period after her husband had died and was saying, well, look, there were opportunities coming where you could have actually got into a new relationship or done something different. And it wasn't from a judgmental point of view. It was just making sure the soul really understood from a soul perspective what was actually happening.
So this counseling is going on between a spirit guide and your client while she's in the regression?
No, this is the memory of what it is.
Okay, so she's already been...
Yeah, so everything between lives is the memory of what happened. A little bit like the past life is a memory of what happened, then the between lives is a memory of what happened. And in her case, she had this past life review and realized that, and the spirit guide said, this is the 3rd time it's happened, meaning that there'd been situations where she'd lost a loved one and had given up on life. And if necessary, although it didn't actually happen in this case, spirit guides can link into the other past life memories so the soul can recap to get a broader understanding of what the recurring theme was. But in her case, that wasn't necessary. So she understood that she wanted to redo the life. Not that the spirit guide said she had to, and this is a really important point, that spirits don't form any sort of judgment. It's only the souls judging themselves. And this is a lot different than how a lot of people think a spiritual experience is. That, you know, this idea of if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go down to hell. It's not like that at all. It's very much like trying to understand what went wrong and what could be done differently. So in her case, she went off with a spirit guide to what's called a soul group. And a soul group are souls often reincarnating many lifetimes together in different roles. And one of these soul group members was her husband from that past life. So the two of them had an emotional reunion, and they started to plan the next life. And she said that she wanted to be able to work through this issue of losing a loved one without giving up on life. And her husband from the past life said, well, I want to learn patience. I know how to work through that issue of losing a loved one, but I still want to master this thing about patience.
So this was going on during the past life regression. She was witnessing what had happened between lives before. Is that what's going on here?
She's recalling the story of what happened, the discussion that took place
Before she came this time.
Yes.
Okay.
And the two of them decided that they looked at various options. You know, could she be a man? And would that make any difference? But she decided in the end she'd be a woman again. But the difference she would make is that she would be independent. So she would have an ability to be able to do her own business, have her own form of income after he died. Her husband was going to die early so that she could have the experience of losing a loved one. But what he wanted was to learn patience. So it was planned that there would be some business opportunities coming his way. And if he took his time, they'd be successful. If he rushed in quickly, they would be unsuccessful. And her job was to slow him down and to counsel him to take his time so that he could learn about patience.
Well, this sounds awful lot like we're creating destiny. I mean, do we really micromanage our future lives to that degree?
Only the main points, not every minuscule detail. I mean, the people that we're going to be with, I mean, in this case, she planned who the person is she was going to be with, which was the soul who was her husband from the previous life, that he was going to die youngish, and that's what he planned. And then she would work through the issue of losing him. Other than that, a lot of other things in life are just entirely up to them. So filling in the details, you know, the sorts of job that she wants or things like that could be planned, but not necessarily. The important thing is she had to learn having a life where she had an opportunity to work through an issue. Because if she just had a life without any plan, it would be very hard to master a particular problem.
Right, to address whatever it was.
That she wanted to learn, yeah.
So do lives occur in order? Are we always reborn in this future, or can we move backwards in time?
Well, it's quite a difficult thing to say what's the sequence of things, because in our human brain, we think of everything in terms of a timeline of the past being something that happened earlier that we can learn from. The present is the only reality that exists. And the future is to give us hope, something to aspire to. So with our human brain, that's how we look at time. And from our human brain, we would see the point of death in the past life in human linear years, all the way through to the birth in the next life. But from a spiritual perspective, time has no meaning. I mean, it could feel for souls to be a fraction of a second or many years. But once you start talking about things, how does time experience as a soul? It gets quite difficult to translate that into the human mind. I mean, when people come back from near-death experiences, they talk about it all seemed to happen in an instant. They have incredible knowledge that they come back with, yet in reality, their heart could have been stopped for 30 seconds before they came back. So this thing between time as it's experienced in the spirit realms and time as it's experienced in the human form are different, and it's best just to separate them.
So isn't if we look at it that way, isn't the progression of what we decided to do, who we decided to be with, all that stuff, isn't that also a human idea? Are we really looking at a metaphor of what's actually going on?
In what particular way? I didn't quite understand that.
Well, what I'm trying to say is you were just talking about how time doesn't really exist in the spirit realm, but then how do progression of events and that sort of thing, how those exist there?
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite hard to say whether souls actually go back in time to experience past lives or whether they go in the future. Some people would suggest that because the past, present, and future all coexist in the spirit realms, but it's a concept that the human brain just can't understand. So I tend to think, and it's pointless trying to grasp a concept that doesn't make sense if it's not going to be of any help. So I've always taken the view that in a human brain, it's better just to think of everything happening in a time sequence where people have past lives one after another in a chronological order. From a spiritual perspective, that might not be the case, but from a human mind perspective, that's easier to make sense of this whole area of reincarnation.
So basically, when we're talking about reincarnation and what goes on between lives, it's kind of like a shot in the dark, really, because we're having to translate between the way our linear minds work when we're physical and what the rules are of the rules of the road in spirit. And it strikes me that, boy, there's a lot of room for error in that.
I don't quite follow that. I mean, it's a different perspective. I mean, for example, we look at death as a very tragic event in a human body, but in the spirit realms, it's a soul coming back to their true home. And there's often like spiritual equivalents of parties or welcoming. So how things are experienced in the spirit realms is different. And in fact, the spirit realms is our true home. I mean, being in a human body, although we may think it's home, is just a vehicle to learn something. But the experiences people
Andy,
have, though. Yeah.
Andy, is that time for us to take another station
Okay.
break? Please stay with us as Andy and I continue to explore NEDs, past lives, and soul experiences between lives. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Searching through the night, one people, one nation. Searching for the light, one people, one nation. Coming from the stars. Brilliant feathers of an unearthly hue glide by on the edge of his dream. A whisper of touch, an unheard song. Whose bird takes flight, prompted by his broken heart.
It's in the past. What does it have to do with the now? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Andy Tomlinson. His website, pioneeringnewconsciousness.com. Andy, so we have more or less established that it's hard for us as humans incarnate to totally get what goes on the other side between lives. That being the case, what's the value of researching this when we're unsure of what's going on? How can it help us now?
I'm not too sure what you mean by unsure of what's going on. I mean, the accounts that people have, and there have been hundreds of thousands of people now having these accounts between lives, is very clear. They know exactly what's happening. They know why they've incarnated and what the purpose is. I think where things start to become unclear is when people move away from people's experiences into the theory of what happens in the spirit realms. For example, when people are going through their experience between lives, none of them are saying, oh, how long is this taken in real life? They're just talking about the events that happen one after another. And I think that's the important point, is all the information I'm talking about isn't based on my views or my beliefs. It's based on the accounts that lots of people have had. Hundreds of thousands of people now have had between life work. And Michael Newton, who pioneered this, had worked with 6,000 between lives before he published his first book. It's around about 15 years ago. So, this is a phenomenon that is very repeatable and is very real, but it helps people. I mean, in the case of the lady that I was talking about from Canada, when she came out of her between life session, she understood what had happened, why she was in this particular situation, and it gave her the spiritual motivation to form a new relationship, to get on with her life, and to engage in life, and she'd work through a life issue. So not only did she get very helpful information about who she was and where she came from, but she was able to use it in a very helpful way in the here and now. And ultimately, that's all that's important. Going into the past is only helpful if we can change our current life in some meaningful way in the here and now.
That makes sense to me. So, why do you suppose, or do you know, that we have amnesia when we're born? For the most part, some of us don't, but for the most part, we're clueless of our past lives when we come into a new one. Why
Yeah,
is that?
well, and for a number of reasons. I mean, for one, the experience of being in the spirit realms, which is a place of unconditional love and bliss and expanded consciousness, is amazing. And when people are in human bodies, in the situations that we have in Earth, with wars and corruption and chaos that happens in our lives, if they knew that what it was like to be out of the body, it'd be very hard for them to continue to stay in the human body. They just say, oh, that's it. I want to end the life so I can go back to my real home. So certainly one reason is that for people to lose the memory of what it's like in the spirit realms until they're ready to handle it is a very important thing. And the second reason is that if people know fully what the life lesson is, it's like taking an exam and knowing what the answers are. Sometimes it's easier not to know what the exams are going to be, and then it's much more meaningful when you have to answer the questions. And so it means when people go through the life lesson, it's harder, but they'll get much more out of it.
So, when you're working as a therapist, psychotherapist, or past life regression therapist, how do you know the issue? How can you tell whether to look in this life or a past life for the origin of the issue?
Well, I think normally between life regression is used for when people want to know more about their soul purpose, why they're here, and more about who their soul colleagues are, and to have that whole experience of being in that different expanded vibrational state, which is very, very special. It's life-changing and affects people in a very positive way. They choose to have that form of regression, so they simply ask for it, and providing that there's no blockage or spiritual blockage, then they can have it. The other question is, if someone's trying to work through a personal issue, like an emotional issue, or get to the root of an illness or a disease, it could either be the current life, it could be quite recent, it could be in early childhood, it could even be in the baby before it was born, or it could be in a past life. And the way that therapists do that is they use something called bridges, which take them to the very source of the issue. If they're using hypnosis, they would make the intent to go to the very source of the emotional issue. Sometimes if someone's got a physical problem, we were talking before about someone having a pain in the chest. Well, if people focus on that pain in the chest and they're asked to get into the posture of what's happening, the story will just emerge. So it could be a past life or it could be a current life. So that's spontaneous.
You're accessing it through the person.
You're accessing it through the symptom that the person wants to clear. So it could either be done through hypnosis by making the intent to go to the source, or just allowing the symptoms to bring up the issue for the client.
Interesting. So let's change gears a little bit here, because you have some interesting thoughts on what is new consciousness.
Well, and this is all about the big shift that's happening at the moment on the planet. Every 2,000 years, the consciousness of the planet goes through a big shift. it went through a big shift with Moses, and then 2,000 years later through Jesus. And Moses brought in the idea of one God rather than multiple gods. And Jesus brought in the idea of a caring God.
So,
And
so do these align with the ages? 2,000 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
and,
Okay.
and some people talk about links with astrology, how we're moving from one constellation to another. And we're now in another 2,000 point. But this also seems to coincide with something that's happening far wider than the planet Earth. It seems that the whole of the cosmos is going through a big change in consciousness. And the change of consciousness that the planet is going through is there's beings of light who are directing high vibrational energy through to the planet. And this is raising the vibration of the planet. And this is simply because Earth has its own consciousness, has chosen to have a different vibrational level so it can have a different type of experience in the future. And because we as humans are set up piggyback on the Earth, then these vibrations are coming through to us as humans.
Is this a
Now,
cyclic event, Andy? Does this happen cyclically, or
yeah, well, there is a talk about the constellations. As the Earth rotates, it spins, and that gives us day and night. It goes around the sun, which gives us the different seasons. But the axis of the Earth is slightly off center, so it slowly twists in a different direction. And that twist is full rotation is 26,000 years. And it means that the Earth, as it rotates around the sun and for the day and night, is moving into a different part of the constellation.
are
So
you
the
talking about
effect,
the precession of equinoxes?
yes, of
Okay.
course.
Mhm.
And I mean, that is the theory, but I look at it more from the practical position, and that is that the planet has decided it's going to increase its vibration. These vibrations are coming into the planet and they're affecting humans in a big way. It's affecting humans because it's amplifying everything. I mean, humans are just energy, even though we have a body. Our body is just like ice. It's still energy. It's just like in a slightly lower vibration. Our emotions around us are a higher vibration. And then our soul consciousness around that is an even higher vibration. But all of this is being vibrated up. If we're holding any negative emotions from old wounds, that's been amplified. So if we're holding on to fear or anger, then it'll be amplifying that by a factor, which makes it much more uncomfortable for us. If we're in a place of joy or happiness, that's been amplified by a factor of 10. So there's almost like a separation of consciousness. Those that haven't worked through the emotions and cleared them or choose not to are staying in the existing consciousness, but it's just getting more and more extreme. For example, the polarities between people who have one view or the other about whether it's
Yeah,
politics or
it's
this,
getting it's getting pretty wild out there with the
it's
polarities.
getting wild.
Yeah,
But
we're going, Andy. We're I hate to do this, but we are out of time in the whole show. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
okay, thank you so much. I'm delighted to talk to your audience.
Thank you. Our guest this hour has been Andy Tomlinson, a known expert in past lives and the soul experiences between lives, and co author of Between Lives Past-Life Regression, Near Death Experiences, and the Evolution of Consciousness. To find out more about Andy, where you can find his books and all he has to offer, visit his website, pioneeringnewconsciousness.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join us again right here on X-Zone TV channel xztv.ca, where this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.